Good morning. Good morning. As you guys find your seats again, I just want to welcome all you guys that are here. Hey, we are so glad you're here. Whether it's, you've been here for a long time or this is your first Sunday, you're a guest. We thank you so much for being here and sharing this day with us. We also just want to say to all of you guys that are listening offsite, thanks so much. All right, so we're just, I don't know what that was, I'm sorry. We're glad you're here, you guys. We're all glad you're here. We're just glad. I'm glad today. Anybody else? I'm glad. All right. Hey, today, like Connie already mentioned, we're talking about choices. And we're asking ourselves a few difficult questions. Do the choices that we make define us? And why do we make some of the choices that we make? Now, whenever this idea of the choice comes up, there's one thing that comes to my mind. And when I was in high school, I was in this musical entitled The Choice. There's some pictures up here of little Edward. That's me in high school. Yep, that is me. I was in high school, so I did have a beard. Yeah, but so I was in this play, and we did this play probably like 100 times at this church where I grew up. And the story that always sticks out in my mind is one summer after this Easter musical, I was doing Vacation Bible School, and I was running the Team Rec games. And I was working at one of the nights after Vacation Bible School. I was working at my job where I rented these like bicycles. It was like in a tourist place, so we rented out these bicycles. And so we had a lot of families and stuff. And I'm sitting there and I see these little girls. And they recognize me and they say my name and they wave at me. So I go over and I start talking to their dad. And I didn't know him at all. And I'm like, hey, how's it going? I'm Ed. What's your connection with the church? Why do you go to the church? I mean, why do you go to the church? But like, how do you know the church? Because he doesn't go. And he's like, yeah, we go to this other church, but we come for Christmas and Easter. And I'm like, oh, have you been to our Easter musical, The Choice? And he's like, yeah, you were in that, weren't you? I'm like, oh, man, I guess he remembers my acting. I was a little better than I thought. It must be memorable. And I'm like, yeah, actually, I was. And he's like, were you one of those Roman soldier guys? I'm like, well, technically, but I was Pontius Pilate. And, I was all excited because he remembered me. And he's like, looks at me and he's like, oh, yeah, you're the guy with the huge calves. And I'm wearing shorts. And I'm like, yes, these are them. Yeah, cool, man. Well, I'll see you later. I didn't know what to do. And so I'm like, who says that, right? Like, that's what you're going to say. That's the first thing you're going to say. Like, what in your mind is going on that is the thing you're going to choose to say at that point? Like, I don't know. So he will always be defined in my mind as the creepy calf guy. Just always. I can't really help it. That's just, because of the thing that he said, that's just what I got. And so I think a lot of times we do that as well. I even know there's people in our church that kind of are maybe sometimes defined for their choices. I'm looking at doing some journals for our youth ministry, and the physical embodiment of all things crafty and scrapbooking is Connie. Like, I can't think of anything else other than Connie when I think of scrapbooking. I know she loves that picture of herself. Another one that jumps out at me is when I first moved down here and I'm trying to talk to Pastor Nate. He's like, what do you do? And I'm telling him, and I'm like, so yeah, what are some things you do, Nate? And he's like, oh, I just love to crunch ducks. I'm like, crunch ducks? Is that like a cereal? Or what is that? And so he loves to hunt. That's his term, crunching ducks. They shoot and they make a crunching sound when they hit the ground. I don't know, right? It's awesome. Hunting, that's all him. That's what he does, And so a lot of these things that we do are important to us. And in conversations with people, they just kind of come out. Like, you can't go 5 minutes in a conversation talking to Joe Risk without the Green Bay Packers, right? This is a picture of Joe. He let himself go a little bit since that picture. But right, a lot of times, these are some base value things, right? These are some things that somewhere along the line, Joe was introduced to the Packers and Nate was introduced to duck hunting, and Connie's like, oh, scrapbooking's awesome. And these things got instilled into us because what I find, on any level, whether it's a surface level like this or a really deep spiritual level, is that all the choices that we make stem from our core values. Each one of us has this system of core values in our life that our choices really stem from. Now, a core value isn't that much of a choice any more than eating or breathing is, because a core value is something that is so much of our DNA. It's like, this is me. This is who I am. This is what I would die for. I would go and I would live my life for this, and I would die for this. I would quit my job for this. This is something that I'm not going to give up or sacrifice no matter what. And we see Jesus live like that. If you have your Bibles, just put your finger in John chapter 7. We see Jesus live like that. And all of us, every day, we all make choices that come from our core values all the time. But what is interesting to me, and a couple weeks ago, Pastor Nate shared a message about bad advice, and this passage is tagging along with that, is a lot of times the advice that we get or that we hear from people will sometimes point us to things that we think or that we feel. And what I'm trying to point out is that sometimes we confuse our core values, the things that are really important to us, on things that we think or we feel. Because it isn't bad for us to listen to things or to make decisions or have advice or hear advice based on things that we think or that we feel. I don't know. Let's look at what Jesus does. If you can go with me into the passage, we're going to take a look at this, and we see that Jesus is starting to make some decisions based on some of these things. So Jesus is at a point where he's just starting out in his ministry. And his brothers are saying, hey, you should go up to this festival. In verse 8, it says, you ought to leave here and go to Judea so that your disciples may see the miracles you do. Sorry, that was 3:8. Go to the feast, Jesus says. I'm not going up to the feast with you, but for me the right time has not yet come. Having said this, he stayed in Galilee. However, after his brothers had left for the feast, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. So what we see Jesus do is something that's pretty important. So this is the principle. We see Jesus listen to advice and hear things from people and take people's thoughts and people's ideas into account. And he also takes his own ideas into account and the own things that he feels. But we see Jesus take all of that stuff and weigh it up against the core value that is in Jesus' life. It's this incredible core value that changes everyone's life. It changes his life. It changes the ministry's life. It changes all of our lives. It makes Christianity what it is today because of this single core value that Jesus lived his life for and that we as Christians need to try and strive to live our life for. This is one of the most fundamental things that we can do, and it's a core value that Jesus embodies his entire life. It's incredible. So let's take a look and see if we can figure out what that core value is. So Jesus takes that advice, and he listens to it, and he hears it, and he weighs it against the core value that he is. And in John 14:15, we see that he goes up to the feast. It's about halfway, so it's not when everybody else said, but he goes up to the feast. And he begins to teach. And the Jews were amazed, and they asked, hey, how did this man get such wisdom and learning without having studied? And Jesus answered, my teaching is not of my own. It comes from the one who sent me. So Jesus is saying, hey, this is not just about me. There's something deeper and there's something greater here. And I feel at this point the people that were around, interest was a little bit piqued. And they're like, what is this thing that Jesus is talking about? Who sent you? What do you mean by that? What is this core value thing all about? What are you saying? What does a core value even look like? Well, this is what Jesus says. In verse 17, he says, anyone who chooses to do the will of my Father will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. See, this is it, guys. This is the core value that Jesus lives his life by that absolutely changes. His core value is, I will choose to do the will of the Father. And that is a huge concept for understanding, is what does it mean to choose the will of the Father? What does that even mean? Because we make decisions every day that come from somewhere. I mean, if we want to be super in shape, if that's a core value to us, we're going to run, we're going to do things, we're going to make choices. Our food choices are going to come based on the core value that says, I want to be healthy, I want to make good life decisions with my body. If we have a core value that says, hey, I'm just going to live for myself, I'm going to live for pleasure, well, our choices are going to show that. We're going to do things that are only about us, that make us feel good, things that show that value in our life. We have a core value that says, hey, I'm going to sacrifice anything for my family. I'm all about seeing God's love and will work in my family, well, that's going to show up in our life. Now, if we have a core value that says, I'm going to just show love to my family and sacrifice anything for them, and we put that up against another core value that says, I'm all about myself, well, you see how those two things aren't going to work? The deeper core value, the deeper thing that matters to us in our lives is going to come to the top. Are you guys with me so far? Say amen. Because this is an important concept. If we don't understand what this is, it's going to be difficult for us to choose this core value of the will of the Father. So this is what Jesus is showing us. He is showing us that the most important thing in his life is choosing the will of the Father. So how do we get ourselves to choose the will of the Father? I mean, what does that even mean? What does it look like to choose the will of the Father? Now, the will of the Father is something that is very difficult for us to understand. And it was hard for me to understand. Now, this is a true story in my life, and this happened about a year ago. And I really didn't understand this deeply until just this last week. About a year ago, I've been here for about a year now in Kearney, Nebraska. And so I moved down here. I came to apply. And when I came down here, I was really struggling with some really tough things in my life. I was at a point in my life where I just graduated college. I had no idea what to do. I had a lot of thoughts of man, my life should look like this. I should have this job. I was applying for some jobs. I was in a relationship that was very difficult. And one of the things that relationship did in my life is it was more of a core value than doing God's will. I put that in front of my relationship with God. And so my value system was all messed up. And I was doing so many things that weren't about serving God. I tried to, and I strived for that. But I was at a place where I was really not sure what God was doing and what he was saying. And so I come down here, and I get down to Nebraska, and pastor's asking me millions and millions of questions. And I am just like, man, I don't even know what he's, it was just stressful. I'm like, I'm not going to fit in here. I didn't even know the buckle had men's clothes until Nate told me he was wearing it. I'm like, you're wearing the buckle? All right, cool, man. It's like, they have men's clothes. Like, oh, all right. So, but, so I didn't feel like I was going to fit in. I was taking all of these outside sources, all of this stuff, all of these negative things, my thoughts, my desires, and I was taking them, and I was weighing them against some of my values. But what I wasn't doing is at this point, I was not weighing them against the core value that says, I choose to do my Father's will. See, what happened is there was a point where in the interview process last year, pastor just gave me a car and I was driving around. And I remember I was right over by Runza and by Hobby Lobby. And I just took a right, and I'm sweating to death in the car, and it's air conditioned, even it's still on. But I'm just like, man, what am I going to do? But God said, hey, Ed, this is where I wanted you the whole time, right here. Not necessarily in Kearney, Nebraska, but I wanted you to be in my will. If I have to bring you out of some place where you're comfortable, out of these things that you are not letting go of, if I have to grab that from you and drag that out of you, that's what I will do. And I'll bring you to this place where people only dress in one color, in red, and all this craziness. I'll bring you there if that's what it takes for this core value of doing my will to be in your life. I honestly will never forget that. I'm driving, and he just said, hey, Ed, all I wanted you to do was to be in my will the whole time. That's it. Be in my will and seek my will, and that is all that matters. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me, what job it is or what I own or what house I live in. That's what I want my heart to say, and that's what God was teaching me is my core value should be choosing the will of the Father. Because at that moment, I got an absolute peace. I just felt, hey, God is here, and this is what I'm going to choose. And have you guys ever felt that? When you're doing something you know is the will of the Father, and you just feel, oh, this is good. Right? Isn't water baptism a huge step for that? That was awesome. Amen? That was so cool. That is a huge choice that shows, hey, I'm going to do the will of the Father. And I'm going to get up and stand up and say, this is what's important to me, and I'm going to go for it. And by doing that, having all these people hold us accountable to doing that. And that is awesome. And that is what Jesus is saying to us. He's saying, hey, Are you going to do my will? Or are you just going to hold on to all these things? Because that is what our human nature says. Our human nature struggles with making the right choices. And that stems all the way back to Adam and Eve. Because there is an enemy out there that does not want us to choose God. Satan even tempts Jesus when he's alone. See, God had to pull me away from all the things that were important to me to a place where I was absolutely by myself to say, this is how you be in my will. See, Jesus used time alone to get to know his Father's will. I mean, do we do that? Because these fleshly desires that we have sometimes, man, they are so difficult to truly understand. Now Jesus is challenging us to make sure that we continually choose the will of the Father. Now, what the big struggle for us, I think, is sometimes our choices aren't always based on our core value. They can be based on the emotion and the flesh desires. Now, I'm going to try and illustrate this, so stay with me here. Hopefully this makes sense to you. They got it in first service, but we'll see. I think it makes sense. It makes sense to me, so if not, maybe I can explain it to you better later. But this is what I think of. Now, when I was a kid, there was a thing called the Book It program. Does anybody know what the Book It program is? Everybody have any idea? All right, Book It program, yeah. Now, when I was a kid, I was really chunky, okay? I played a lot of video games, and I didn't really have a lot of friends. And so my parents are like, man, we need to get this kid off of his Game Boy and to do something else. We need to hang out with some friends, just even read a book. Like, I didn't like to read. They're like, he's not going to be any less chunky if he reads a book. But still, let's get him to read a book and not waste so much money on batteries. I mean, man, that bill was expensive. So they wanted me to read a book. And what they did is like, here, we'll give you $0.25 for every 100 pages. And as a kid, I'm like, no, that is way too much work. I'm not doing that. And they like amped it up. It's like 50 cents for every 50 pages or whatever. And I still was like, no way. And then finally, we got introduced to this Book It program. Now, if you know what this is, for every so many pages that you read, you would get this little sticker that would be a candle that would go on a cake on a button. And once the button was full of, I think it was maybe 8 candles or something, you could take that button and go to Pizza Hut. Right? So, as this little chunky kid, I went to Pizza Hut with my button, and I would get a personal pan pizza that was black olives and pepperoni. And I'm just like, dude, this is awesome. I'm going to read all the time. And so I just started reading, and I'm reading every week. And I'm like, if I read so much every Friday, we can get Pizza Hut. And my parents are happy. I'm reading. Then they're like, he's just getting chunkier now that he's getting all this pizza. And so they're like, we got to do something. But what happened, and I realized over time, was that I was reading only because I wanted this personal pan pizza. Right? I didn't read because I cared about the books. I didn't have any desire to read the books. I just wanted this pizza. I'm like, let me get that pizza. It's going to be delicious. Whatever book, I don't care what you give me. I like Mary-Kate and Ashley books. They had the mystery and whatever. Those were cool. I still remember some of those. But I didn't care about the books. It wasn't until a little bit later when there was this Star Wars Jedi Apprentice series paperback that came out that I read all of those books. And what that taught me was, hey, I cared about these books. I started to read at that point because it was a value in my life. Because I wanted to do it. And the same thing was older when I actually gave my life to Christ in a real way. I read my Bible. I went after God. I made decisions based on that core value that said, I'm going to serve God and I'm going to go after God. Because it's important to what God says. Serving and doing the will of the Father is a core value that was in my life. It wasn't just for these other things. It wasn't just to be in a leadership group or just to come to the church or just to be here. Because doesn't the enemy use that sometimes? Hey, we're here 5 nights a week. We must be going to heaven. Ooh, but what's going on in our hearts sometimes? And I only say this because that's a huge thing for me. I think about that. Am I only reading my Bible? Am I only living the way that I am right now because I'm serving the role of a pastor? Wow, that's hard for me. Or is it because that is a core value in my life? And all of us can ask ourselves that question. Is what we're doing, our involvement, the way that we read our Bible, the way that we grow in our relationship with God, based on a group or a camp or something? Or is it based on a core value? Because that's what, as a youth pastor, I hate to say it, but this is true. We see it a lot. Students will go to camp and they're there and like, oh, I'm all jacked up on Jesus. I love God. I'm going to go home and start a Bible study and do all these great things. I remember as a kid, I'm the same way. I'm like, Mom, I'm so sorry. I was the worst kid ever. I'm never going to do this thing again, and I'm not going to say this to you. And, and what happened? I'm going to be appreciative of all the things that you do for me, Mom, and I love you. And I'm going to get up early and read my Bible and not be grumpy in the morning. And no matter what, I'm going to be happy. 2 weeks pass, and she makes the wrong kind of bacon for me, and I am ticked. Mom, this is the crispy bacon, and I want, what doesn't that happen for us, right? Don't we do that? We get all excited at church, and we're like, yeah, I'm going to go serve God, and it's going to be awesome. And we get in the foyer, and somebody bumps us, and we're like, dude, you better watch yourself, bro. Or we get into the car, and our kid spills the macaroni Kraft all over the back seat, and we're like, hey, now, whoa. And our attitudes are the worst, or whatever. Or we get home, and, you're a guy, you go and you change, and you come out, and your wife's like, honey, you forgot to shut the freezer. Or, whatever it is, right? Like, I know that happens a few times. Like, there was a week ago, this is a true example. Kyle and I we really felt like we were both excited to talk after church. She was growing. I'm like, oh, she's crying. God's doing some things. God's speaking to me. This is awesome. And we got in an argument over, like, the wrong flavor of gum or something stupid, right? Isn't that what happens? The enemy does that. I know the hardest times in my life to hear and be true with my relationship with God are on Wednesdays and Sundays. Because the enemy wants to come in. And there is an enemy that wants us to just be fully developed in our fleshly desires. And what we see Jesus show us is that we need to release our fleshly desires and continue to strive to do the will of the Father. That is what he asks us to do so much. He says, hey, and that's what these people in this passage don't understand. They don't understand what it looks like to do the will of the Father. And this is what Jesus embodies his entire life. One place that he does that just jumps out to me is in Luke 22:42, and it's when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and it's right before, I said that right? In the right garden? Yeah? Yeah, okay, good. He looked at me like I said the wrong garden. I'm thinking Olive Garden? That wasn't where he was at. No, so Jesus... Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay, sorry. Just don't want to say the wrong thing. So Jesus is in the garden, and he's crying, and he's by himself, and he's like, hey, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. What does he say? Not whose will? Not my will, but your will be done. The end of his life. He knows he's about to die. He's about to be just brutally beaten. All this stuff, all these things going on around us, all these things we can't control, right? All these things. But what does he do? He focuses on the one thing he can control, and that's himself, and that's his choice, and that's his core value that says, I will do my Father's will, period. No matter what it takes, if I die, if I go to the cross, I will do my Father's will no matter what. This is it. I'm doing it. You can deal with it. What's up? I'm Jesus. I'm doing my Father's will, right? That's what he says. And that's what he wants us to do. We are called to do our Father's will. And that's it. And that is all there is to it. That's the core value that he's asking us. And that's tough. Because how many times do we not live like that? I know it's hard for me, these fleshly desires. I have to continually check them against my Father's will, because I'll be completely honest with you. A huge issue, that I've had in my life is I've had this desire or this struggle with physical discipline. It's not easy for me to check myself and say, hey, God, what do you want me to eat today? It's real practical with you, but I've had that problem since I was younger, and I think about that sometimes. It's like, what would help me get me on the right track? And I think, maybe if I just went and I played football again, if I had something to compete for, if I really, really wanted to be the next American Ninja Warrior, or whatever it is, if I had a goal, I could do it, right? You know what I mean? But that's the same kind of thing. The reason why I was so in good shape in high school is because I was playing football. I wanted to look good for the ladies, right? And in high school boys, nobody knows Austin. You know what I'm talking about? Right on? No, just kidding. Sorry, man. Don't mean to call you out. But that's what we do. That's what I did in high school. I wanted to be good at sports. I wanted to look good. I did it for those reasons, not because I wanted to be physically disciplined in my life. that wasn't my core value. You know, there are people that have those core values. I mean, sorry to call you out, man, but I see Jeff Falzer. Can I just pick on you for a second? This dude runs like he robs a bank. I've seen him run on the trail, and I'm like, man, he's running from somewhere. I don't want to go that direction because there's got to be a bear or something coming. But he run, you know. But that's the kind of thing we're talking about. To bring it back in, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Is God wants that to be a core value. The serving God to be a core value, not for anything extrinsic, an outside source, for something that is other than the fact I'm choosing to do God's will. And that is all that matters to me. And that is the most important thing in my life, and I will do God's will, period. And that is it. And that's what he's asking us to do. Because what is happening in this passage back in Luke, or back in John where we're at, is the people, they don't understand this. They don't get what Jesus is trying to say. See, Jesus started doing miracles, and they're upset, and they're angry, and they're trying to kill him. And they don't understand this value of doing his Father's will. They don't even understand where he comes from. And they say some pretty weird things to us. I mean, imagine if this was said to us. In John, verse 20, it says, "Are you demon-possessed?" They asked him. Has anyone ever been accused of being demon-possessed? I haven't. What kind of Christian life would I have to live if someone's like, man, that dude over there, he is demon-possessed, right? But this is what Jesus was doing. He was just showing God's will in this incredible way that people are like, whoa, we don't get this. And they did not understand. And see, we see a deeper issue here, what's going on in their hearts as we look further at this passage. And he says, I did one miracle, and you are all astonished. Yet because Moses gave you circumcision, though actually it didn't even come from Moses, but from the patriarchs, you circumcise a child on the Sabbath. Now, if a child can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you so angry with me for healing the whole man on the Sabbath? Stop making judgments by mere appearances and make a right judgment. See, the people around were looking at the wrong thing. They were looking at the outside. They were kind of looking at like what? The pepperoni and black olive pizza. They were looking at those things, the things that they could control. See, these people were so focused on the rituals and the laws and the circumcision. Why? Because circumcision was awesome, but it's because it was what they could control. They can control all of these things. But what Jesus is telling them is a lot harder. Because I know, and I know you guys know as well, that when we do the will of the Father, it's very hard. It's very hard. We have to release control. And I like to have control. Kyle can tell you that. I like to have control. I don't like to not be in control of things. And that is for all of us, is we don't want to lose control. But Jesus is saying, hey, release control so that way you can do your Father's will. Because this is a standard that we absolutely see in Jesus' life. Is he is asking us, in order to keep choosing the will of the Father, we need to relinquish control. That's what we need to do. We need to let go of control. We need to allow for the things that we think are important just to diminish, and for God's values to be instilled in our life. See, Jesus is saying, and he is calling us to shift and make a change from our values to God's values. He wants us to change from our values to God's values. We see this as a standard at Jesus' life even when he is a boy. We see that when Jesus is 12 years old, and this gives me hope as a youth pastor and even as a man in general. We see when Jesus is 12 years old, what does he do? He's with his family, and they're at this festival, and his family starts to leave, and so Jesus goes and sneaks away. And where do they find him? In the temple, right? And when they find him in the temple, it says, he says, why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house? They didn't understand. But when we see this text and we realize it's that kind of a core value in Jesus, and it was in his life when he was that age, to do his Father's will, to serve in his Father's house, to be close to God in any way, when we see that, that's how he does what he does. And that's what he's asking us to do. That kind of a core value. To love God, not just when we're at camp. to, throughout the week, to read our Bible, to pray, to be and to share with other people about our faith. Not so we can, everybody's like, oh man, you're great. I don't get up here today to say, hey, it's about me. No, it's about what God is saying, because he has so much to say. Sometimes we need to just listen. We need to release control so that way his values can come out. That's what Jesus has. I mean, he's 12. That gives me hope as a junior high youth pastor, right? So hopefully we can get some of these values in these students. And as parents, we know that's difficult, right? Well, I'm not a parent, but you guys are parents. So some of you not. Who knows? But the thing is having control is so comfortable for us. And it's natural. But God calls us to leave behind that control and choose to do his will above all else. See, when we choose to do his will and his call, it looks so much different than everybody else. I remember there was a student that I grew up with, and it was just a heartbreaking thing for me, because what happened was this student loved God and showed that, and would go to camp and would go to these events and go to all of these things. And what happened is, through high school, football came up and peer pressure came up, and when he was able to be on the varsity football team as a junior, he really just started seeking other values other than God's values. Started dating girls, starting to do all this other kind of stuff, and I think we all know some people that are kind of like this. But now he's my age, and he has 2 kids and isn't with either one of the moms, and he's made some choices that stem from a core value that clearly is not God's value. See, that is what God is challenging us with today. We need to make God's values our core values. We need to let go of the control and the things that we feel comfortable with and say, hey, what is it, God, that you are trying to put and instill in my life? How do I make your core values mine? Because this is a huge process. This isn't just a one-day thing. I don't think that there's any of us here that are going to leave today and absolutely get this, because I'm still working on this. And any of the pastors here will tell you this is a tough thing, to continually have a lifelong journey that says, God, I want your values to be my values. Show me what it is that I need to do to make your values the most important thing in my life. And so, where are you at today? If you would honestly ask yourself, what are the choices that you're making say about your core values? Do some of us even know what our core values are? If we look at our choices and we look at the things that we identify ourselves with, or the things that we do, what does that say about who we really, really are? Sometimes they're pretty transparent. There's certain choices that are like, ooh, that says a lot about that person. But think about what your core values are. What are the core values that you have in your life? And how do they come out in your choices? Because if you have a core value that says, I'm going to serve God and I'm going to do God's will, period, we're going to see a lot of choices that line up with that. But if we have a core value that says anything less, that says, I'm still trying to figure out this God thing, and I think it's important for me to go to church, we're going to see a core value and choices that say, all right, I'll go to church, I'll get involved to do this. But what God is saying is it's so much more than you think. It's so much deeper, and it is this shift of thinking from our values to his values. Who is it that you're going to serve? Are you going to serve yourself, or are you going to choose me? So if there's one thing that you guys remember from today, it's that God is asking that our values shift to become his values. So what we're going to do is we're going to close. And as we close, what I'm going to challenge you guys to do, and myself as well, is just to think, hey, God, show me what my core values are. And there are things in my life, so I'm going to be doing this right with you. But what are the things in my life that are important to me, that just define who I am and define my relationship with you? And help me understand how I can change those and make those values what it is that you want for me. Because as Christians, as people who have chosen to follow Jesus, this is what he asks of us. And this is why Jesus was killed, because the people around, Pharisees, all them, they didn't understand. They weren't able to make that shift from the things that they thought were important to God's values. So let's check ourselves with that today and say, God, what do I need to do to make your values my values? And let's be completely honest and say, God, no matter what, I don't want to leave here until you show your values. So let's pray. Father God, we thank you first and foremost for speaking and for being able to truly just show us, hopefully, just speak into our hearts and show us what some of your values are. We thank you for this time. And God, I just pray, Blaise, for each person in this room, that your values would come and we would understand a little bit more of what it looks like to serve you and put your ways first. So, Father, help us choose to do your will, period, and to speak to us in this time, and that you would just allow us to hear from you, that you would meet people at the altars, meet people in the back, and that we can engage with you, whatever that looks like. So, God, we love you. Just come and speak to us.